Hello. I'm so happy you're here with me. Thank you very much. I want to thank Jeannie, Jill, and Stacy especially for inviting me to be here today to talk about Stoicism. I am not a scholar of Stoicism, but I am a student of Stoicism. It's a philosophy that's of interest to me, and I'm really happy to share it with you, some of my thoughts with you today. So why don't we start? This here is a picture, this is a picture of what's called the Stoa Poikil. And this is where the name Stoicism comes from. A stoa, this is a painted porch in Greece, and this is what's left in Athens of where they used to gather during that time period. And so that's where the name Stoicism came from. Now, what drew me to Stoicism? I read a book by Ryan Holiday called The Obstacle is the Way and William Irvine's A Guide to the Good Life. I just stumbled upon it and I found it really interesting. They're more contemporary works, right? But they introduced me to some of the general concepts, and then I started reading some of the classic texts, which is really, really interesting. Unfortunately, many of the original texts have been lost to antiquity. But there are certain texts that are still around that are core texts that are encouraged to be read, and I'll share which ones those are. Stoicism, for me, provided a meaningful and pragmatic life perspective, right? Stoicism, one of the uniquenesses of Stoicism is that it is a pragmatic philosophy. It's not just something theoretical. And you could read a lot about Stoicism, and there's a lot of theories, somewhat abstract. But at the end of the day, Stoicism is a pragmatic philosophy. You want to practice Stoicism. And so that's why, one of the reasons why it's so popular. It was helpful for me when I was going through a really hard time in my life. And so it was something that really provided me some ways of understanding what was happening. Now, I don't know if in therapy, if you're familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy, the philosophical roots of CBT are Stoicism. And you'll start seeing some connections there. Stoicism provides a positive and humanistic worldview for living a meaningful life and thoughtfully engages life struggles. So humanistic here is meaning that it's very practical for the human being. Okay. Now, in the contemporary world of Stoicism, there are what are called traditional Stoics, and those are Stoics who are theists. They believe in a God, right? And one of the things that makes Stoicism so popular is that it can be applied in someone's life, and it doesn't contradict someone's theology. So there's traditional Stoicism that believes in a God, and then there is what's called modern Stoicism, which is more an agnostic or atheist, right? That still believes in the practical philosophical underpinnings, but they look at it from a more kind of modern worldview. And that's one of the great things about Stoicism, right? If you go to a Stoic conference, whether it's virtual or in person, or you meet people, it's very ethics-based. It's very much how you live out your life and how you live out this philosophy, more than if you believe in God or not, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. There were two Stoic principles that are particularly meaningful for me. One is that virtue is the highest good. And for Stoics, virtue is very, very specific, okay? So I'm going to talk about that in a moment. And the second thing is this concept called the Dichotomy of Control, which seems self-evident, but it's at the core of Stoicism, and it's a very important concept, which is that some things are in our control and some things are not in our control. Some translations say some things are within our power, some things are not within our power. Now, again, that seems self-evident, but as we look at it in a few minutes, you'll see that that is a foundational belief of Stoicism and acknowledging that distinction. And then for me, Stoicism complements my Christian life, my Christian faith, right? It doesn't contradict it in any way. So here are some fun facts. The founder of Stoicism is Xeno of Cytium, right, from Cyprus. And there's a story, now I don't know how much of this is legend, right? You know how these stories, after 2,000 years, you're not sure. But the story is that Xeno was a wealthy man and was on a trip and was shipwrecked and ended up in Athens and walks into a bookstore. And he picks up Xenophon's Memorabilia, which has some of the teachings of Socrates. And he's so overwhelmed by what he's reading that he asks the owner of the bookstore, "Where can I find men like this?" And at that moment, Crates of Thebes was walking by. He was a cynic with a capital C, right? That was a philosophy. He happened to be walking by, and the owner points to him, and Xeno follows him and becomes a student of him. And Stoicism's roots are in Cynicism. Now, let me just say this right now. I'm using the term Stoicism and Stoic with a capital S, referring to the philosophy, not Stoic with a little s, right? Sometimes when we hear Stoic, we think of maybe, what's the name of the character? Mr. Spock, right? We think of Mr. Spock, no emotion, right? It has nothing to do with that, all right? So when I talk about a Stoic, I'm talking about a capital S Stoic, someone who's studying or following this philosophy. Okay. Brief history, ancient Greek philosophy, Hellenistic, as you all know, means Greek-like. During this time period, there were several philosophical schools happening at once. I mean, this is one of the most fertile times in Western civilization, where all of these various philosophies and philosophical schools are occurring all at once. And you could literally be walking around and walk into a different school. And these were several of the philosophical schools that occurred at that time in Athens. Now, Stoicism is considered a middle way, a via media, right? So first we have, there you go. I'm using the pointer. Okay. So first there's, no, I got trained on this. This is good. Okay. So Cynicism here, the purpose of life is to live in agreement with nature, focus on what is necessary by nature, reject all desires for wealth, power, sex, and fame. Okay? So cynics lived as simple a life as possible. And sometimes cynics would walk naked, right? Because they had nothing and believed that you need nothing at its most extreme. Now, then you have Epicureanism, where the greatest good is to seek modest pleasures in order to attain tranquility, freedom from fear, and abstinence from bodily pain, and by living a self-sufficient life surrounded by friends, right? Now, sometimes when we think of Epicureanism, we think like hedonism, right? That's not what it is, right? The idea is to try to live a life of modest pleasure. And so Epicureans were famous for building gardens, right? Having friends over. Those were the modest pleasures, right? To grow your food, to have friends over. And so that was really important. Stoicism was a middle ground. So Stoicism studied the Cynics, as well as other philosophical perspectives. It was a practical philosophy of personal ethics that emphasizes living a virtuous life. And it was seen as a middle way between the extreme of hedonism, of Epicureanism, and the extreme of asceticism of the Cynics, right? It was a middle way. Fun fact, Thomas Jefferson was a student of Epicureanism. And so in the Declaration of Independence, when we read, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, reflects his Epicurean roots, right? Now, what if he were a Stoic? Who knows, right? That may or may not be in there, but that reflected his Epicurean roots, right? So that's interesting. Okay, who are some of the key thinkers of Stoicism? Well, certainly we have Xeno, the founder. We have Seneca, a wealthy banker, a Roman senator, philosopher, successful playwright. He was like amazing. He just did everything. But like many great people, controversial as well, he was also a tutor of the Emperor Nero. He was banished for a while, and so he struggled. So his writings, and when you read Seneca's writings, it's like a playwright. It's just wordy and flowery and beautiful and descriptive, right? And he was with Roman politicians. He was just an intellectual of his time, but also had this other side to him, right? That was kind of controversial. There's Musonius Rufus, who was considered the Roman Socrates. He was the greatest pupil of Epictetus, and his writings and his teachings influenced Marcus Aurelius. He's considered a Stoic sage, and I'll speak about what a sage is in Stoicism. Now, and unfortunately, most of his writings are gone. Most of his writings are gone. Epictetus was a slave who was granted his freedom, permitted to attend the lectures of Musonius Rufus. He started a school of philosophy, and his primary concern is in the art of living, okay? And his writings are a standard text that we all should read, no. And then we have Marcus Aurelius, who was trained in Stoic philosophy. He was a Roman emperor who journaled almost every night, reflecting on life and his response to it. He's considered one of the last of the 5 good emperors, the Pax Romana. His text is called Meditations, which is my personal favorite Stoic classic text. Everyone has their own favorite Stoic person and their own favorite text. Meditations for me is a work that I go back to regularly. And the Meditations was actually a diary, a journal that he wrote every night. It wasn't a book that he thought would one day be published, but it was discovered and it was published. And so here you see the insights of a man who was an emperor, who was studying Stoicism, who was trying to live as virtuous a life as a Stoic, and how he's wrestling during that time period. So it's really fascinating. So here are some of the core teachings I'm going to just touch on. The aim, the virtues, the disciplines, the areas of philosophy. Really, these should be the areas of study, okay? And then 5 goals. I selected 5 goals that I see for Stoicism. So I'm just going to stop right there for a moment. Any questions so far? Anything you want me to clarify? Yes?
You've changed my vocabulary.
Oh.
If the Stoicism doesn't mean Stoic, like we understand it, how do the rest, is that also true of Cynics? Because we talk about Cynics, but the description here doesn't sound like what I might have been.
That's an excellent observation. And yes, you are correct. So when we say Stoic, right, in contemporary, someone who's Stoic is kind of someone who's serious, right? stiff upper lip, and but a Stoic in this sense is a follower of Stoicism. Yes, and it's the same thing with cynic, right? We use the word cynic with a lowercase c, and we mean kind of cynical, right? But cynicism with a capital C is a whole philosophy. Or if someone is a cynic with a capital C, that means they're a follower or a student of cynicism.
No relationship to the way I understand it.
No. That's just, then that's just the evolution of language, right? That's the evolution of language. But that's a very good point. Thank you.
Fred, will you do me a favor? When someone asks a question, will you repeat the question so that our audience not here can hear it?
Excellent, yes. So her question was that does cynic, the way we use it now, is that similar or different to cynic or cynicism in the philosophy? And so I mentioned to her that I explained that cynic with a lowercase c, as we understand it now, means cynical, right? But in the classic sense, a cynic with a capital C is a student or philosopher of cynicism. Thank you for the question. Thank you for reminding me. Okay, the aim. So what's the overarching aim of Stoicism? And that is to nurture eudaimonia, which literally means happiness, but what it means more fully is human flourishing. And so the aim of Stoicism is to nurture human flourishing. How? By living the virtues in harmony with nature. By living the virtues, which we'll talk about, in harmony with nature, capital N. So that's one of those words, right? Nature with a lowercase n and nature with kind of a capital N. And as I'm using the word nature here, meaning the cosmos. They would mean it as the cosmos. They would mean nature as God. They would use nature as Zeus, right? The original Stoics were theists. They believed in a God. They may not believe in a personal God as, say, some of us in the Abrahamic traditions like Christianity or Judaism or Islam, right? But they believed that the world, that the universe had a conscious existence, had a purpose, right? And so but some of the language, they might use the word God, Zeus, nature, cosmos, right? But they all relate to the same thing. And so for them, you want to nurture human flourishing by living the virtues in nature or in harmony with nature. And we'll talk about that. We'll unwrap that a little bit more. So what are the virtues of Stoicism? There are 4 virtues of Stoicism, and they flow out of the teachings of Socrates. And Socrates, for the Stoics, especially at that time, was seen as like the Stoic sage, right? The one person that we should model. So the 4 virtues are wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice, right? So wisdom, navigating complex situations. And we understand wisdom differently than knowledge, right? Knowledge is like I could read a book. And learn something in a book, but that doesn't give me wisdom per se, right? Wisdom is something greater than that. Wisdom there's almost something cosmological, especially for the Stoics. Wisdom is a knowledge, right? So I can read about being a good person, but I may not be a good person, right? So there's a difference between knowledge, what I read, the text, what I study, and how I live out my life and how I understand things more deeply. So wisdom, courage to do the right thing. And it doesn't, courage, could be in battle, but it could be courage in everyday living, right? There's a saying, I'm going to mess it up. Seneca said it, that, and I'm paraphrasing, so forgive me, that sometimes waking up every morning is the most courageous thing we can do. right? Just the idea of the day ahead of us is an act of courage, right? So courage is every day. Doesn't mean we won't have fear, but that we proceed in spite of that, okay? Temperance, moderation, right? Exercising moderation and self-control. So some people will say that the four virtues are wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice. So I'm using those two terms simultaneously. Is that the right word? Interchange. Thank you very much. Okay. And then the last is justice. Justice. That's a very important concept for Stoics. The idea of treating human beings with fairness and kindness. Okay? And so to live a virtuous life for a Stoic is to nurture these virtues. To nurture these virtues. That's what it means to live a virtuous life for the Stoics. Now, there are some disciplines that Stoics exercise. One is the discipline of desire, and that is what is and is not in my control. What is and is not in my control. And that's the desire. Desire, it's an invitation for us to desire what is good and avoid what is bad. Sounds simple, right? Not that simple. But to desire what is good and avoid what is bad. Then there's the discipline of assent. Assent is how should I respond? How should I respond to something? Okay, that's the second discipline. And then the third discipline is action. How should I behave? How should I behave? And so here you see that this represents feelings, thinking, and actions. Okay? All right, stick with me there, because I'm going to show you, I'm going to put together a little box with all the things together, and I think it'll make a little bit more sense. And then there are three major areas of study, philosophical study. First is physics. Now, physics is one of those words that they're not using the way we understand physics today, right? But physics for them is how the world works. And for the Stoics, and for Stoic theists who believe in God, right? Theology is the culmination of physics. It's the culmination of physics. So how does the world work? And that's where understanding the cosmos, metaphysics, right? Those things are just really, really important. Then there's logic, how to reason well. So that's another philosophical area that the Stoics study. But the heart of Stoicism is the philosophy of ethics. That's the most important thing there. How to live virtuously. How to live virtuously. And much of contemporary Stoicism focuses on the ethics, how one lives virtuously. So here we see, here's the box, right? The matrix with all those things we covered. So here are the four virtues: temperance, courage, wisdom, and justice. I'm going to start with the lower level. Justice, the virtue of justice, is connected to the discipline of action. How should I behave? And the study of ethics, how to live virtuously. And the vice is injustice. Wisdom, the virtue of wisdom, is connected to the discipline of assent. How should I respond? Right? That's what wisdom helps us to know how to respond. And then logic is the area of study, how to reason well. We learn how to reason well. And the vice is ignorance or folly, foolishness. Courage, these two fall under the discipline of desire. What is in my control and what is not in my control? And the area of study is physics, how the world works. And the vice of courage is cowardice. And then for temperance, the discipline is also desire, what is in my control. And the area of study is physics. And the vice is intemperance or excess. Excess. So Stoics very much follow the tradition of the cynics of minimizing excess, right? Because the thinking is the more we are caught up with materialism and things and excess, the more it takes us away from being in harmony with nature, right? Because our minds are on lesser things instead of the bigger things and the more important things, okay? So that's kind of put some of that together. So now I'm going to go over the 5 goals, So I haven't lost you yet, right? Haven't lost you, you still awake? All right, okay, good. All right. Now, goal number 1 is to nurture virtue. Virtue is the highest good, and our actions are to be in accord with virtue. If our actions go against these 4 virtues, we are living an unvirtuous life, right? Now, we could debate that a little bit, but I'm just trying to show you kind of the pure thinking of this. These are the 4 virtues. To live, to nurture virtue, is to nurture these 4 areas. Happiness and tranquility are the consequences of virtue and wisdom. Happiness, so for Stoics, the goal to life is not happiness and tranquility. That's not the goal. That is the consequence, the reward of living a virtuous life, right? If the goal were happiness, then we would be with the other philosophical group, right? But for Stoics, this is what happens when you live a life of virtue. Goal number 2. I'm the worst PowerPoint putter together because I'm an old professor. I put way too much text. I know it, so I'm owning it, but it helps me. I'm sorry. I'll highlight some things. Goal number 2 is to discern what is and is not in my control. That teaching comes from Epictetus. It's called the Dichotomy of Control. And he teaches that we only control our volitions. That is, that we only control our opinions, desires, and actions. That's it. We have no control over anything else. We can't control involuntary bodily actions, right? If someone yells boo behind us, or if we're driving a car and someone pulls in and we have, right, that's a reaction. We don't have control over that, okay? And that the key to happiness is understanding this dichotomy. Now, why would this be the key to happiness for Stoics? All right, so here it comes. If we desire things that are not in our control, we will be unhappy. If we desire things that are in our control, we will be happy. That means everything, right? So, we can't control our spouse or our partner. If my happiness is based on this other person, I'm going to be unhappy often because I have no control over this person. Okay? We can only find happiness in those things that are in our control. Okay? We should ground our happiness in those things that are within our power. Unhappiness comes from grounding our happiness on external things that are not within our power. And so here again, this is the discipline of desire. What is and is not in my control? And this has to do with the study of physics. So another example might be, and there are plenty of examples, but like, let's say, all right, here's a good example, but I'm gonna pull it back. So let's say I've done everything in my power to prepare for this presentation, right? And I really want you to be happy with this presentation. right? I really want you to like it. I want you to like me. I want you to like the presentation. I have no control over that. The only control I have is to prepare to study as much as I can, to prepare the presentation, and to deliver it as best I can. I can't control whether you're going to like it or not. That's outside of my control. You see that? It seems self-evident, but I'm happy that with the way I studied, the way I prepared, maybe not too much with the PowerPoint presentation, but that's I have control over that, right? So I'm okay with that. But I have no control of whether you'll accept this or accept me. I have no control over that, okay? All right. I'm going to skip this because that's just going to add more confusion. All right. Goal number 3. Goal number 3, to examine your initial impressions. This I'm not going to explain properly. I'm going to do my best. This is one area that's hard for me to explain. I don't know why, but it's hard. Okay. But to examine your initial impressions, it is not the thing, but the reaction to the things that is in our control. It is not the thing, but the reaction to the things that is in my control. Right? All right. If Jenny comes up here and hits me and throws me out, right? I have no control over that. But I have control on how I'm going to respond. Right? If someone cuts me off when I'm driving, I have no control over that. But if I chase the person and start screaming at them, right? Or do something foolish, I have control over that. Okay? It's not the thing. It's not the initial impression that has power necessarily. It's our response to the impression. It's the response to the impression. And so impressions can be true or false. Fred is amazing. Fred is overrated, right? It could be true or false. I don't know. I don't know that, right? So each person makes that decision. Now, an assent is agreeing with an idea or impression. So Stoics say you can give or withhold your assent to something. You can give or withhold your assent to something. And there's a saying, a fool gives assent to initial impressions. A fool gives assent to initial impressions. A sage does not. So, and this is very apt. This is where cognitive behavioral therapy draws a lot in this area. So, for example, if we get angry, right? The anger in and of itself is neither good nor bad. And some of us maybe get angry occasionally, and maybe some of us have wrestled with anger our whole life. The anger in and of itself is neither good nor bad. How we respond is what's good or bad. How we respond to it. If we have anxiety, right? The anxiety in and of itself may not be good or bad. We want to think about what's triggering the anxiety or the anger. We want to go, I'm feeling really angry right now. I'm feeling very anxious right now. I wonder why. We think about it, right? And we go, oh, okay, this is why. And then we respond accordingly, right? When our emotions kind of dissipate a little bit, when the passions kind of dissipate a little bit. So the discipline of assent for those impressions that may lead to irrational passions or troubling fears, the discipline of assent is particularly important for these areas, right? And this has to do with the discipline of assent, how should I respond, and the area of study is logic. All right, so we've hit 3 goals so far. So we hit goal number 1, which is to nurture virtue. These are the 4 virtues. Goal number 2 is to discern what is. and is not in my control, or what's called the dichotomy of control. Goal number 3 is to examine your initial impressions, the initial impressions. All right, goal number 4, we have 5, right? Goal number 4 is to treat people with respect. We want to live a good life, right? We hope that happiness and tranquility will be a reward to living a virtuous life. But for Stoics, it's also meant so we can be good to others. That's the justice. We're not just developing virtue for ourselves, we are developing virtue in service to others. And so the Stoic version of humanity, how they understood humanity, is based on this concept called okiosis. And it refers to the sense of the self in relationship to others. So this is kind of a model of what that looks like, right? This is the idea, the concept of humanity or community or cosmopolitanism for Stoics. And this concept from Hierocles is this relationship. It's the self. I'm developing virtues here as best I can to impact relatives, friends, to impact the local community, to impact the country, the nation, to impact humankind. Now, in that time, the nation would be Greece, right? So we're kind of extrapolating it from more contemporary understanding. But again, the idea of developing the virtues is not just for self-centered reasons, but also so that we can help others. And that's the justice component. Now, Xeno, his ethics, he had these 3 baskets. He would say, things are good, or things are bad, or things are indifferent. Things are good, or things are bad, or things are indifferent. So he would say that the only things that are good are virtue, and anything that participates in virtue. That's what's good, right? Very narrowly. And bad things are any vices that take you away from the virtues, right? That's what vice. Anything that goes contrary is a vice. What's an indifferent? So indifference is an important concept for Stoics. So a preferred indifference would be like, say, health and wealth, right? Who wouldn't like to be healthy and wealthy, right? That's a preferred indifference. I'd like that, okay? That's the Stoic. I'm not a cynic, right? I'm a Stoic. So yeah, I'd like that. But that doesn't make me more virtuous. And a non-preferred indifferent would be sickness and poverty, right? The opposite. None of us wants to be sick and poor, right? But if we're sick and poor, that doesn't mean we're not virtuous. It has nothing to do with virtue. Having things, not having things, doesn't make one virtuous. What makes one virtuous is living those 4 virtues, right? So this, yeah, it's a preferred indifferent. It'd be nice to have, but that doesn't make me more or less virtuous. This, I'd rather not have it. It's non-preferred, but that doesn't make me more or less virtuous. And then indifference is like, what color shirt should I wear today? Right? That doesn't make a difference, right? That's just an indifferent indifference. So this also falls under this category because for Stoicism, Stoics want people to know that just because you have stuff doesn't make you more virtuous, right? Virtue is virtue in and of itself, right? So there's a justice element to that, and that's where that comes from. Okay, now the fifth goal, here's the 5th goal, is to live in harmony with nature, to live in harmony with nature. And nature would be, I would divide this in 2 areas. to live in harmony with human nature, right? Our own human nature, our focusing on the virtues, our rational abilities, right? We think in a way that other animals don't and can't. Our ability to analyze judgments and to ascend to adequate impressions, right? Everything we went over, avoiding violent emotions, minimizing mental disturbances or upsetness, right? Human nature. We want to be in harmony with human nature. We also want to be in harmony with the nature of the cosmos, which means in Stoicism, accepting my place as part of the universe and widening my circle of compassion. But here is accepting my place as part of the universe. So I'm going to give you an example. It's a really bad example. It's the one I came up with, all right? It just happened to me. So, I'm a New York City guy, lived in New York all my life. There was a change in life. The wilderness journey happened. I'm sure everyone has had a wilderness journey. And I went to San Diego for a year, and I became dean of a small liberal arts college there. A colleague of mine is the president. He said, Fred, why don't you come here? I was 15 years in one college in New York. It was wonderful. Opportunity emerged. Life happened, right? Ended up in San Diego. All right. And so my friend used to say, well, if you're going to be in the wilderness, San Diego is a nice place to be in the wilderness, right? He would say that. But while I was in San Diego there for that 1 year, I was miserable because my energy was always going back to the East Coast, going back to New York, maybe New Jersey, maybe Connecticut, right? But I wanted to go back. And so I was not in harmony with my reality, with my place there. I was going against that. So I was miserable. I was not experiencing, I wasn't fully present. I wasn't experiencing the fullness of where I was. I was distracted. I did the work, but my energies were elsewhere. And you know how it is. When your energies are elsewhere, you feel it in your body, right? You just kind of. And then God was kind to me and brought me to Ohio, right? And I came to Ohio. I lived in Lima for 3.5 years. And when I came here, I decided I'm going to be fully present. I'm going to accept this, embrace it. I'm going to make this my life, right? And I felt more peaceful and more calm because I accepted, I was more in nature, in harmony with the cosmos at that moment, right? With my reality, with the situation. Even though it was a big change, right? I was at peace. I was at peace, right? So that's a bad example, but that's just an example, right, of where we are. If we're always fighting our place in the universe, where we are, we're just, right? There's always this disturbance, physical, mental, this anxiety. But when we embrace it, things kind of become a little bit better. Right? Now that doesn't apply to every situation, right? There are moments of injustice, there are moments of difficulty those are real issues. But I'm trying to just kind of paint a picture here, right? So that we can understand this. And Marcus Aurelius, there's this concept called a view from above that comes out of the writings of Marcus Aurelius, the Meditations. And I really recommend you pick up Meditation. That's a good kind of book discussion, group, actually. And we've probably seen a video. There was a video I saw where, and I'm going to mess this up also. It's like a camera is on this young woman, teenager, and then the camera goes up, right? And it shows her neighborhood, and the camera keeps going up, and it shows her city, and it keeps going up, and it shows the state, and it goes up, and you see the country, and then you see the globe, and the camera just keeps going up and up, right? And the idea of a view from above is this is almost like a discipline, a visual discipline to help us put things in context when we're overwhelmed, right? We look up and we just see ourselves in the universe, connected with others, connected with humanity, connected with the universe, and it just says, wow, maybe my problem, right? It could be serious, but it puts it in a perspective, right? I'm not the only one going through this hard time. So that's if you're ever in a stressful moment, a stressful experience, that is a Stoic discipline or kind of I don't know what word, an exercise that helps people to put things in perspective. Is this as big a deal, right? And then you kind of put it in that perspective. All right. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I gave you like a lot of stuff, right? 5. So once again, goal 1, to nurture virtue. These are the 4 virtues. Goal 2, dichotomy of control. Discern what is and is not in my control, right? I go to a meeting. I have no control of the outcome. I'll give my opinion. That's my contribution. But someone else has to, the group makes a decision. I have no control, right? What I control is the opinion I give. Goal number 3, examine your initial impressions and don't necessarily assent or give in to that initial impression. Analyze it, think about it, examine it. Goal number 4, treat people with respect, right? That's the core of Stoic justice. And then goal number 5, to live in harmony with nature, to live in harmony in nature, to connect with other people and to connect with the cosmos, kind of, and that's the physics, right? That's the kind of the physics. All right, I'm going to stop there. Any questions? I'm just looking at how much time I have. Yes, ma'am.
It's very interesting. Boy, I would love the handout.
I love the handout. Okay. Okay. You know, I could create a handout maybe after the fact, and I could email it to someone, and then we can.
We can put it on Touchdown.
Okay. Okay. Done. Done. I'll do it. Just give me, yes.
Where does Christianity come in this? It sounds like it's close to Stoicism.
So the question is, where does Christianity come in this? It sounds close to Stoicism. So technically, this is separate from Christianity. But like many of the ancient philosophies, this is a Western philosophy, right? And Christianity has roots in Western Greek, philosophy. And I don't have enough, I haven't done enough study in this area, but there have been some writings that Paul may have been a student of Stoicism. If we read some of the writings of Paul, they seem to have some Stoic underpinnings there, right? So we could see that the early church, Christianity, right, could have, it did, right? It took threads from Greek philosophy, particularly Plato and Aristotle, but you could see there. And you also get a sense of some of the spiritual underpinnings of classic ancient Stoicism, right? You hear some of the theology, you hear the God language, right? And so it's natural for us, like say me as a Christian, to examine this through my Christian eyes. So I would invite, I say this in the Bible study, I would invite us to put that aside for a minute. I take off our Christian or my Christian glasses for a minute. Just look at this objectively. And then we can put on our Christian glasses and see, does any of this, does it connect? Is it helpful? Does it contradict? So, but that's a really good question. Good question. Anyone else have a question? Yes.
There are a lot of concepts that are not identified, like what does virtue? We can't hear.
I'll repeat the question. Yes.
Good and bad. What's it based on?
So she wants to know about the virtues and what the virtues are based on.
How they're defined, yes, because the difference?
So the source makes all the difference. What do they define? That's another lecture, much more deep, and but very basic. It comes from the teachings of Socrates. That's all we need to know for today. Right? Your question goes deeper. What's the source of those four virtues? That's a deeper question. So, good question.
The other part is, to me, this is how to be a Christian or how to live life without God and the Holy Spirit.
So she's saying that you're interpreting this or experiencing this as how to live life without God and the Holy Spirit. So they would not be right? They're not thinking of Christianity, right? But they believe in God. They believe in a God. And there are concepts there, yeah. So, go ahead.
Why don't you?
Why don't I what?
The life with the Holy Spirit is, a lot of this is doing it yourself. And the Holy Spirit is different.
Yes. So this is an ethics-based philosophy. You're making a good point. Stoicism is an ethics-based philosophy. You could be Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Muslim, right? Sikh, and follow some of the ethical teachings without letting the spiritual teachings interfere. So, there are people who are Stoic who believe in like a Stoic God. I have a Christian, my worldview is Christian, right? It's a Christian worldview. Well, my worldview, Christianity informs my faith, right? It informs my faith. But all these philosophies help me to become a better human being, right? I learn from different philosophies. I learn from different religions. I learn from other people, right? Because we're all human beings, and I learn from others. But Christianity is my worldview. And even here, right, we come from different Christian traditions. And so some of our Christian traditions may be a little bit different. But that's a good question. You're raising a good question. Thank you for that. Good observation. Anyone else have a question or a thought? Yes, sir.
Aren't we all Stoics bouncing around these goals? Some of them we know are not, we'll never get there, but we know that they're there.
Aren't we all Stoics bouncing around these goals? I don't know. That's for every person to decide for themselves, for him or herself. Yeah. But these are, again, you see the practical applications, right? Again, it's an ethics-based philosophy. So because of the time, I just want to show, do Stoics believe in God? The ancient Stoics, yes, believe in God. The ancient Stoics believed in God. And it's in many of their writings. So Xeno would say, the cosmos as a whole must be conscious, for we are conscious, and the cosmos is superior to us, right? And then there are others. This is very consistent with the teachings of Thomas Aquinas, the great Catholic theologian, who says that we see God and experience God in nature, right? And that's general, now I'm talking as a Christian, right? So that's general revelation, right? Jesus is specific revelation, right? That's God, Jesus, but general revelation is seeing God in all of nature, right? And so general revelation is something for all people, Christian or not Christian, general revelation. Specific revelation would be in terms of Jesus, that would be that. I'm saying that now, I have my world religions hat on right now. And I don't have my pastor's chaplain's hat on right now, okay? All right. And then in contemporary world, that's what's called traditional Stoicism. That camp are for people who believe in God, right? And so that's called traditional Stoicism. If you Google traditional Stoicism, these are people who study Stoicism, believe in a God. And then there's what's called modern Stoicism. Those are for people who study or follow Stoicism, but don't believe in God, right, necessarily. And I think I'll stop right there. Here are some texts some classic texts. These are kind of standard ancient texts that are recommended. Epictetus Discourses, the Handbook, Marcus Aurelius Meditations, and Seneca. There are a number of writings from Seneca. And then if you want to read more contemporary texts that address Stoicism, these are some of the books. These first two are the ones that introduced me to Stoicism. And then these are some others.
Can we get a list of those?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I could just send you the PowerPoint. How about that?
Yeah.
I'll-
We'll put the PowerPoint on Touchdown.
We'll put the PowerPoint on Touchdown. I'll just send the PowerPoint, and you can just go to all these things. All right. Well, I hope you found this interesting. I hope you found it interesting. Thank you very much for being here. All right. Have a great rest of the day.